Good morning. We're just going to go live now, okay? Welcome to this Babergh Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I am Councillor Mary McLaren and I am chairing the meeting today. May I first of all remind you of some domestic arrangements. Please ensure that you maintain a social distance from all other persons in the chamber and in the social areas. Please ensure that you wear a mask unless you are speaking or if you are unable to do so, and that you use the hand sanitizer and wipes provided. Please maintain social distance at all times during the meeting and during any breaks. Please ensure that microphones are turned off when not in use, that you do not interrupt other speakers, that if you are attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Please ensure your mobile phones are on silent or switched off. Additionally, we will be using e-voting for this meeting on the modern.gov app. I would like to remind everyone present at this meeting that it will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you are also consenting to being recorded by the Council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. Can I just remind members and anybody attending that to ensure that we can all hear well, that all our our laptops and things are not in front of the microphone. I think we all have a habit of doing that. In attendance today, we have our officers, the Assistant Director of Assets and Investments, Assistant Director for Corporate Resources and the Section 151 Officer, and we have Cabinet members, so we have Councillor Dave Busby, Cabinet Member for Assets and Investments, and Councillor Simon Barrett, Cabinet Member for Finance. Can I move to the agenda, please? Apologies for absence.
Good morning, Chair. We have received apologies from Councillor Grandin and Councillor Hinton.
Have we any declarations of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests by members? None to declare? Okay. We are here on item 3 to the call-in protocol for the Babergh Cabinet decision of the 7th of February 2022. I refer to the call-in protocol attached in the agenda and ask members to approve the call-in protocol before we proceed. Could I have a proposer, please? Thank you, Councillor Gold. And a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Osborne. The Governance Officer will now conduct the electronic vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The vote is now in progress on your app. Chair, that's unanimous.
Can I just query that number?
I have 3 votes for.
Okay. Thank you. I now come to item 4 of the agenda. And this is the call-in of the Babergh Cabinet decision for BCA/21/38, Accommodation and Agile Strategy, Endeavour House. I will now introduce the call-in. I believe the paper that was presented to Cabinet on Monday, BCA/21/38, did not contain sufficient information on the capital costs of the works proposed for Cabinet to make an informed decision. 6.7 of the report states the total cost per council would be £250,000 and the total net saving per council would be £338,000. The later calculation has been explained. The former is referred to in the following point. That is 6.8 in the report. The capital costs are estimated and will be refined during the technical design stage of the project. This is the only reference made in the paper with no breakdown on how the £250,000 will be spent. This is compounded by the fact that this is just a share of the overall costs as it is split across both councils. At the Cabinet on the 7th of February, which I attended and watched on YouTube, I noted that no Cabinet member asked questions on costs or debated these elements of this issue. My contention is that the Cabinet approved the paper on a reduction to the floor plate, but neglected to consider the expenditure. There should be an opportunity to examine, debate and vote on the capital costs once these details are available. This is a key decision as proposed expenditure is over £150,000. To fully comply with our constitution, councillors must fully consider all the circumstances. See extract below from the notice displayed on the forthcoming decision list. This has not happened. A key decision, as per Part 1, 12.9.1 in the Constitution, is an executive decision which is likely to 1. Result in the council spending or saving a significant amount compared with the budget for the service or function the decision relates to. 2. Have a significant effect on communities living or working in an area made up of 2 or more wards. When assessing whether or not a decision is a key decision, councillors must consider all the circumstances of the case. However, a decision which results in a significant amount spent or saved will generally be considered to be a key decision if 1, the amount spent is £150,000 or more of revenue or capital expenditure. Expenditure on this scale must not be delegated. The call-in was signed by the following councillors: Councillor Melanie Barrett, Councillor Trevor Cresswell, Councillor Mick Fraser, Councillor Jane Gould, Councillor Margaret Maybury, Councillor Mark Newman. I will now invite the lead signatory, Councillor Melanie Barrett, to present the reason for the call-in and why the committee should scrutinise the decision. Councillor Barrett, you have a maximum of 10 minutes. You may call on other councils from those listed on the call-in notice, which I just read out, but I don't see anybody present, so you have a whole 10 minutes to yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, councillors and officers. I've called this to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee because I believe that as Mary has outlined in my submission to the committee, this is such a significant amount of money that is proposed to be spent. when I first read it, I thought I might have misread it. I thought it might have been 50,000, but it was indeed £500,000 to be spent on half the workspace that we previously occupied. So the benefits appear to be a net saving of 88,000. However, does this saving come at a cost to service delivery and our residents? That is also a concern, although the majority of my reason for referring it is due to the lack of scrutiny on how that money will be allocated. The decision cannot be sensibly made on such a ballpark figure. His previous history of calculations have shown this. There is no detail. And indeed, having looked at papers for today's budget, I note that in that paper, under the general fund budget, it talks about the key elements of the council's responsibility, and one of those is cost management. So I understand there may also be a margin of error within these calculations. We can't assess that until we are given more detail. I don't believe that we saw in the original papers the floor plan. That's now included in this, and I see there's a branding graphics wall, a green graphics wall, and a full height green wall. Perhaps if that had been included with, I presume there would be costs available for us to understand how that cost could amount to £500,000. That would have helped the Cabinet to make better use of their questions to understand how that figure is arrived at. I understand also that some of the cost is soundproofing meeting rooms, but that's not clear from the paper whether the landlord has been approached to see if they would shoulder some of those costs. That should be our first option to make sure that the landlord was going to share those costs. It's unbalanced as well. There were potential costs were looked at as a ballpark figure, but there hasn't been an assessment of the impacts on productivity and output. It seems that the primary move is to serve the needs of officers, and residents will only benefit indirectly, if at all. And so there is a saving, but just because there is a saving, that does not mean this is free money. That can be just unaccounted for. There is always a cost. There is other options that we could spend that money on. So just to look at this in some context as well, this expenditure, 250,000. Some councillors have spent the last 16 months arguing the case for imposing parking charges, where it was estimated that we would raise 212,000. But the same degree of scrutiny has not even been shown to this issue. It's sort of been just taken on face value. In my view, an even greater degree of scrutiny than normal must be applied here, as the money will directly benefit the staff, and the staff are making the decision with only minimal input from councillors. It only indirectly benefits our residents, if at all. Indeed, this move could actually be detrimental to residents, with They might see a reduction in service provision, lengthening service times, or reduced access to officers. I urge you to make recommendations to Cabinet to demand greater breakdown of cost and analysis of the impact of the changes that have been approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Before we ask questions of Councillor Barrett, I'm going to invite the Cabinet Member for Assets and Investments, Councillor David Busby, to present the reason why the decision was taken by the Cabinet. And you have 10 minutes, Councillor Busby.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everybody. The Cabinet supported the recommendations within the Accommodation and Agile Strategy for Endeavour House report on the 7th of February. These recommendations were to reduce and reconfigure the floor space within Endeavour House and to delegate authority to the Assistant Director for Assets and Investments to deliver these changes. The reasons for these decisions were set out in the report, namely to create fit-for-purpose accommodation at Endeavour House, to deliver financial savings over the full term of the lease, and to enable timely, efficient and effective delivery of the project. Councillor Barrett has contested that the report presented to Cabinet did not contain sufficient information on the capital costs of the works proposed for Cabinet to make an informed decision. The Section 6 of the report sets out the financial implications of this decision, resulting in a saving of £336,000 for Babergh after estimated costs of £250,000. The estimated capital costs are based on the concept drawings provided by Concertus and are sufficient for budgeting purposes. Detailed costs will not be available until the full technical design has been completed and the works tendered. But even with costs rising, we anticipate coming in under budget. Waiting for the detailed costs is not an option, as the notice to trigger the break clause must be served before the end of March 2022. Cabinet has to take the decision before then, otherwise the councils will lose the legal ability to end the lease for one of the floor plates. Councillor Barrett has also contested that the Cabinet approved the paper on a reduction to the floor plate but neglected to consider the expenditure. But whilst there may not have been any questions directly relating to the capital costs of this project during the Cabinet meeting, this does not mean that the Cabinet failed to give it due consideration. It means that we were content with the information provided. Cabinet members or other members, such as Councillor Barrett, who attended the meeting, had adequate opportunity to raise any such concerns or questions in this regard. Finally, Councillor Barrett states her concerns that a key decision about expenditure should not be delegated. This is a key decision made by the Cabinet and was advertised as such ahead of the Cabinet making the decision in accordance with our Constitution. The decision to adopt the recommendations was made by Cabinet and implementation delegated to officers. This is normal practice and in line with our Constitution. I'm happy to answer questions and enter into the debate later. Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Busby. I now ask members of the committee to ask questions of the lead signatory, Councillor Melanie Barrett or Councillor Dave Busby. Who would like to? Councillor Gould.
Thank you for that, Councillor Busby. Can I just ask, you say that Cabinet were aware of the content of how the expenditure was arrived at, how that 250 figure had actually been popped into the chart there, and they didn't need to ask questions because they were aware of it, and that's okay. But any members of the public listening to that Cabinet meeting wouldn't have had that information, so it would be perceived by members of the public, or indeed other councillors listening to that Cabinet meeting, that it was just almost nodded through. So I think my question would be, if members of the Cabinet were aware of that of how that 250,000 is broken down, why wasn't that question asked so that there could have been a record and the public could have been privy to the information as well?
The actual content of the £250,000, I don't think wasn't broken down in very minute details, put it that way. The project as a whole was considered. So it was bearing in mind there were a number of reasons for doing this. It wasn't just finance, okay? The prime concern is to get the offices into a fit state for people to return to and for us to deliver our services. And it was determined that the best way to do that would be to release half of the space and to reconfigure the remaining space. This would generate a saving. It would create offices that were fit for purpose for the foregoing future. The cost of £500,000 for the total, or £250,000 per council, may seem significant, but the savings are much greater than that. You know, if you went to any finance person and said, here's a project, it'll pay back within a couple of years and continue going on to give you savings, they'd bite your hand off.
Can I come back with, I agree with all of that, that's not my point. I don't know whether you can easily find the bit in your statement that you read, can you? And reread it to us? Can you easily find the bit in your statement that you read to us and reread it? The bit where you said Cabinet were aware of it.
Well, I mentioned that detailed costs weren't going to be available until we've...
Yeah, it wasn't that bit.
Okay, you're thinking, whilst there may not have been any questions directly relating to the capital costs of this project during the Cabinet meeting, this does not mean that the Cabinet failed to give it due consideration. It means that we were content with the information provided.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the next bit?
And Cabinet members and or other members of the Council, including Councillor Barrett, who attended, had adequate opportunity to raise any such concerns or questions in this regard.
The bit that said that you were content with the information provided, I'm assuming that you were provided with more information than we've got on the expenditure. Otherwise, are you saying that you were content with the 250,000 spend without any detail of the breakdown?
I mean, I think the information they had was the budget figure, which has been of 250,000, the total spend.
Okay.
We haven't broken that down. I mean, we've recently got the breakdown of the cost summary from our consultants. And again, this is not the final figure because we aren't at the detailed stage yet.
Yes, I mean, we all know, don't we, that costs for any sort of building work are on the up. And nobody can put a final figure on it because, you know, costs are in a state of flux with both Brexit and COVID happening together. It's a perfect storm in terms of trying to assess expenditure, isn't it? But nevertheless, the 250 can't have been an arbitrary figure that was plucked out of the air. It must have come from somewhere. And I think that's what we would like a little bit more, that's what I would like a little bit more detail on, how that figure was actually arrived at. Don't dispute the fact that the savings are there, absolutely, but how was that £250 figure arrived at?
Well, the figures were provided by our consultants. They produced an estimate of the total costs and have since come up with a number of options and costed those out.
Okay.
Can I Councillor Gould, sorry to interrupt. We do have on the agenda actually an opportunity for us to question the Assistant Director for Investments, but in asset and investments. But in fact, this might be a good opportunity just to assist Councillor Busby to, if that's all right with you, Emily? Thank you very much.
That's fine, thank you. So the budget figures were provided with our consultants, Concertus, who had developed the concept plan, which was included in the report. So I think it was Appendix 1, but also included as a smaller version of the plan within the body of the report. So the estimate was based on that drawing and provided to us by Concertus. Until we have the full technical design worked through and until we've gone out to tender effectively for those works, we're not able to provide any further detail. But Concertus are obviously very experienced in delivering these kinds of refurbishment projects, and so they thought that was an appropriate budget. As Councillor Busby stated, we probably have been on the cautious side because of the rising costs that we're seeing in the market at the current time, and we would hope to be able to deliver the project under budget moving forward, but we are in quite a challenging time in terms of contractor pricing and availability.
Thank you, Councillor. Do you have any questions for Councillor Barrett?
Yeah, just one, I think, really.
Yes.
Councillor Barrett, your comment that the project would benefit officers, but there would be no quantifiable benefit to our residents. I think I just have a question there around, surely, if our officers are benefited, because the offices our officers work in are improved and the working conditions are improved, and I'm sure that all of our Babergh staff are, I know that well-being is sort of key as a consideration. Surely if our officers are happy in their offices, our residents will be benefited, maybe not a quantifiable pounds, shillings and pence benefit, but happy officers equate to more content residents because it trickles down that way, doesn't it? So I would just ask whether you would agree with me, really.
I think I said indirectly that officers will benefit directly and residents will benefit indirectly. But whether the end user, whether the person having their bins emptied or phoning up the council for assistance of some sort will actually be able to benefit from the offices being refurbished is a very, very remote possibility, I feel. It's really difficult to quantify, totally impossible to quantify, really. Yes, we want employees, staff to have a modern work environment where they can meet and do their best work. But I think they've got that already, to be honest. I think this is a modern dedicated workspace. It's not like it's not like Corks Lane, which was quite an old building, had its quirks. This is a very dedicated building. It's got meeting space dedicated. It's got breakout areas. It's got all those things that people can do their best work here. So I don't feel that perhaps even the officers don't benefit that much from this. Perhaps it is the benefits are quite difficult to discern, really.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Gould?
I think so. I think that there's a few things there around workspace, and with people working remotely now, however modern a newer building is, as the work pattern changes, the fixtures and fittings of the workplace need to change accordingly, I think.
Councillor Gould, do you have another question?
I don't think I do. I think I think my question might
drift into debate.
Yeah. I have no more questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Can I just say, Councillor, to make it easier, could we perhaps address questions to Councillor Barrett first and then go on to Councillor Busby?
I'm afraid Councillor Gould's questions have been well explained. and I believe Councillor Busby's answers have been really well put. And the budget figures by the consultants who took on board this project is one where you need to identify. I cannot see, as Councillor Gould has explained, I cannot see the figures here against the breakdown of the various works. Works, I've worked in major buildings with Lloyds for years, and it does cost money. I know that probably won't be that for IT, but building works itself will be quite horrendous, I should imagine. And the changes of H&V, heating and ventilating, and also electrics will also be very large. But I'd like to see them.
Do you have a question, Councillor?
I haven't, I'm afraid.
Because in fact there'll
all
be time.
been well questioned by Councillor Gould.
Okay, because we've got an opportunity to discuss our Councillor Barrett, I don't have a question for you, but I have questions for Councillor Busby. Actually, my first question was around the one that Councillor Gould asked, which was, given that the Cabinet has a duty to explore all circumstances around a decision, I just wondered why no questions had been raised by Cabinet members in relation to the decision. But I think Councillor Gould asked that question. But it just, unless you'd like to add to that, Councillor Busby.
So I didn't quite get the question.
Well, because there was we're looking at the expenditure of £250,000, which is quite significant. It's over the amount that is to do with a key decision. I was just wondering why Cabinet members had really not explored that during the Cabinet meeting, because it's important to the public to hear. Why was no questions raised around the finances of the
Well, I assume that they trusted the estimates given by the consultants. I mean, when you think £500,000 sounds a lot, and somebody said, how can you spend £500,000 on furniture? Well, we're not. The furniture comes to, I don't know, probably 300,000 of that, sorry, 150,000 of that. It's nowhere near the ultimate cost. When you do these works, there's a considerable amount of, as Councillor Osborne said, there's a considerable amount of construction work involved. There's detailed work in terms of design. There's demolition works. There's a whole host of things. These are the costs that we're still waiting to get the detail on. But the Cabinet members would understand that in a project of this size, it isn't just a case of buying another 110 new chairs.
That doesn't explain why nobody asked any questions.
Well, I can't answer that. I don't know inside the minds of all of our Cabinet members, especially certain Cabinet members.
Well, he's here.
Yes, Chair, you can ask other Cabinet members who are present to comment.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Barrett. I just had to check the process, really.
Yeah, I mean, I was not in favour of this. I feel that the subject is on two issues, and they need to be treated separately. So on the issue of the lease being revoked, or the break clause, I don't have a problem with that, and that's a sensible option. That's one area. So I think the Cabinet were voting primarily on that, because that was part. I did not vote. I was one of 3 Cabinet members that did not vote for this motion. So in my mind, I was not happy with the spend element, but I couldn't separate that out. So if you look at the vote, it was a vote in total, not as two separate issues. Had it been in two separate issues, I would have voted to withdraw and hand in the break clause, because I think that's sensible. We clearly don't need as much space. What I wasn't happy with, and reflected in my overall vote, was that the figures of £500,000 did not represent, I don't think, and as Cabinet Member for Finance, I find it difficult to justify. But obviously I could not vote, and we had a time limit on this, which is crucial. So from your committee's point of view, I think the time limit needs to be recognised and the break clause needs to be put forward. But I would say the spending issue on the 500,000 for the refurbishment of what is only a 4-year-old office needs to be questioned, and that is where, as another Cabinet member, that's where I came from. If that's helpful to you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Well, we will make our own decisions based on our own discussion. Councillor Busby, I've got some more questions for you, if that's okay.
Respond to that first or not?
Okay.
I think the office is older than 4 years.
It's not 2017.
Well, the building's been a lot older than that. And I'd question as to look, there are two elements to this. And it's not just about cost saving. The cost saving, yes, we could do that, as Councillor Barrett has said. We could just do the cost saving. That means that we then retain the office as is. And there's a question as to whether that's suitable. Councillor Barrett, Melanie Barrett, thinks it is suitable. Personally, I don't think it is. Working patterns have changed. I find the offices totally uninspiring. They're characterless. They don't promote the right kind of mental attitude that we want from our staff, in my opinion. They go back to the 60s and 70s where we used to have typing pools. They're just the wrong kind of office environment for going forward. And yes, it makes a huge difference if the staff feel as though they've got the right facilities to work in and the right ambience there. It makes a difference to their performance. And therefore, to me, it is worth doing for that. And if you're going to do that, if you're going to make a change, it's going to cost some funds. Yes, it is. But the savings are there as well. You can't underestimate the benefit to the working of the staff from a change like this, and I think it will be significant. And I'll relate a little story later.
I think we've got to go back to the content of the call-in, actually, and keep our minds on that. We're drifting a bit into other areas. The call-in is about £250,000 that has not been explained, and the Cabinet exploring circumstances around the decision they made to approve that. So I want to actually stick with that. In reading the papers, and I've read all the papers, I did not find any inaccuracies, but I did feel that as a non-Cabinet member, there were some figures like proposed savings that were quoting the overall cost to both councils rather than Babergh District Council. Now, in my thinking, the paper was being presented by Babergh District Council, and so I probably was looking for figures that were specific to Babergh District Council, but I thought that was confusing in the paper. But as a layperson, I felt we should go back to basics, and I didn't see this in the report, which was the starting point. And so, Councillor Busby, I'd like to know whether you can tell me what the annual cost presently of the lease is for gold plate and lime plate.
I'll have to refer to my esteemed experts on the left.
Okay.
I can't give you the.
Thank you. So the table in section 6 does show the total costs, because that's actually how the savings are built up. So it's just about inverting those. But in terms of the rent, we currently have a rent of £164,000 per annum, business rates payable of around £80,000, and service charges as well of around about £170,000 per annum for both lime and gold floor plates. So I think Catherine might have added that up for me. It's about
464,000.
Yeah, that's right.
Busby, one point for somebody like me would have been helpful to have started with that and then taken the figures from that. What that does give us, if there is a break in the, and perhaps somebody can confirm this, if there's a break in the lease, we get 6 months benefit, because the break in the lease, the operating break will be from September to March. So I made that 58k, which comes up in the table on 6.4. You can see that. Okay, thank you. However, the capital costs that have been proposed are not the only cost. And I wondered if you have a ballpark figure for the dilapidations which will be required to be paid for to the county council in the event, in the break in the lease, the operating break in the lease.
Can I answer that?
Thank you, Emily.
So within the report, there is a sentence that says that there is budget for, within the corporate buildings revenue budget, for dilapidations. Now, dilapidations are a matter for negotiation between the landlord and tenant, so I don't think it's appropriate in public session to be sharing that figure, because that could compromise our ability to negotiate a good position with our landlord. So that's why that figure is excluded from the report.
But presumably, Emily, if the Cabinet, because this is a discussion about a Cabinet decision, we're not really debating the outcome of the paper. If the Cabinet had actually wanted to question the dilapidations, could that have been discussed in private session?
Yes, anything can always be discussed in private session if it's taken outside of public session. But again, I think in terms of the dilapidations, until we have those completed those negotiations with the landlord, we won't know what that amount is. There are different ways of approaching dilapidations. You can either undertake the works yourselves before the expiry of the lease as a tenant, or the landlord can seek to claim damages at the end of the lease for the works that have not been undertaken. Those damages are limited by the diminution in value, and so it's quite difficult to provide anything other than an estimate in terms of what the dilapidation expenditure is likely to be until you get beyond the expiry of the lease.
Councillor Busby, but that never actually was raised, was it, within Cabinet? Even if you'd got the figure in private, were dilapidations ever discussed within Cabinet and the cost for dilapidations?
No, but you seem to miss the point that the Cabinet members and members of Council that were at the meeting had the opportunity to ask that question if they felt there was some concern over it. We didn't hide it. It was the question was there for the asking if they needed to know the information.
The second cost is the adaptations, which of course is being calculated as 250,000 for Babergh District Council. And I think we've had, this was one of my questions, but I think we've had an explanation from Emily about what those costs include. But what my question is around that, that's not included, we have used Concertus, the external consultants. Do we have any costs so far on, you know, what they've undertaken? Because they've undertaken quite a bit of work, I think, already. Do you have those figures?
Thank you, Councillor McLaren. So we have a budget for fees for Concertus for around £15,000, of which around about £6,000 have been incurred to date.
And Emily, does that come out of this? That's already come out of this year's budget, presumably? Is it?
The £6,000 will be, yes, will have come out of a property budget, so one of the corporate budget codes. But if the project goes forward, then those fees will be capitalised because it's a capital project, so it will be within the numbers included in the report.
Thank you. Can I ask you about the staff survey? Because I was present at the Cabinet meeting, so I remember you giving some figures around that. Could you just explain that for us? Sort of how many people responded and what was the percentage of people that, you know, favoured hybrid working?
Well, I think
or
Emily's
the
got
the change in the working arrangements.
I mean, the staff survey has only just been completed. Emily's got the latest figures on that. So
Sorry?
the staff survey's just been completed, and Emily has the latest figures on that.
Okay, thank you, Emily.
Thank you. So I think the staff survey that Councillor Busby is referring to is one that we've undertaken recently and doesn't relate directly to this project. So in terms of the survey for the staff survey in relation to this, we had 221 respondents. That's around about 55% of Endeavour House based staff who responded. The main reasons wanting to come back into the office or for returning to the office were social interaction and collaboration, which was around about 57% overall. They were the key drivers for returning to the office. Other reasons were meeting space as well. So collaboration was a really strong theme in terms of reasons for coming back into the office.
So 50% of the 221 were looking...
No, so we had 221 respondents, which is
Yeah.
around about 55% of Endeavour House-based staff. 57% of those respondents said the main reasons for wanting to come back into Endeavour House were for social interaction and collaboration reasons, with a further 15% saying meeting space. Desk space was around about 7%.
Thank you. I was just interested because we have a workforce of 579 people. Whole-time equivalent's 525. So that was 50% really. And Councillor Busby, can I come back to you? Do you think that is reflective enough of the workforce?
Which I think is pretty high percentage return on that. They're not all office-based either, of the 500 and whatever it was, 75 that you mentioned. They're not all office-based, so yeah, I think that's a pretty good return. I think one thing that's been failed to be mentioned is that we did have a working group, a councillor working group, which has been going on for, I don't know, 6 months, 8 months, 9 months. We've met at least 3 times. Joint working group on this project. It's not just something which I or Emily has come up with and presented to Cabinet. It's been discussed at the working group, and hopefully the working group has then taken that information back to their political groups for information and for debate. This isn't a surprise when it came to Cabinet. At least it shouldn't have been.
Thank you. Just linked to that, there was an assessment under DSE, so that making sure that people are,
Thank you, Chairman. I think Councillor Busby covered it already. I was just going to make the observation that obviously, yes, you're right in terms of the total number of staff that we have, but they aren't all based at Endeavour House. Clearly, a large number of those work out of the depots and are out in the districts every day, rather than being office-based.
The assessments of people working from home, has anybody considered the cost of that? Because there's an assessment can be undertaken under health and safety at work, can't they, to make sure that working from home is safe.
Thank you, Councillor McLaren. So we have been undertaking DSE assessments throughout the pandemic to ensure that our staff are working safely. There isn't an additional cost to those assessments per se. They're managed by our health and safety team internally to our own corporate resource. If there are issues that arise through those assessments, then as a council we have been offering some support to ensure that those members of staff can work safely. So whether that's been providing additional equipment like chairs or screens, or providing a contribution towards chairs if needed. So that has already been undertaken over the last 2 years whilst we've been working in this way during the pandemic.
Thank you. And my final question, Councillor Busby, I'm sure you're pleased. I asked this question at Cabinet, so I'm asking the same question again. What if it doesn't work out as we planned? And the reason I asked the question is that the Suffolk County Council obviously is our landlord. The loss of £232,000 a year in rent is quite a substantial sum for them. You would expect somebody who are good managers of public money, as a county council, would very quickly fill the spaces left with partners of the county council. So what do we do in the event of this proposed plan not working out properly?
Like any proposed plan, you would reconsider and act accordingly. If you're saying that there's not enough workspaces, we may have to reconfigure the office. Times are changing. If we do nothing, it may not be the right thing to do. All I can think of is staff have got the opportunity to come back into the office now. How many are coming back? Are they enticed into the office? Do they feel as though they want to come in? Obviously not, because there's never anybody here, or very few people here. We've got issues. Collaboration, social interaction, meetings. These are the reasons why people want to come back to the office. And that office doesn't meet those requirements, in my view. So you would need to consider, if it doesn't work in terms of numbers, well, we can alter the configuration of the office.
Thank you. Well, that's the end of my questions. The committee, Councillor Gould, have you any more questions that you've considered during the time? Councillor Osborne? No. Oh, Councillor Barrett, sorry. No, it went off again. Yeah. Okay, sorry. I've got two questions, actually. Well, actually, Emily's answered one of them. But I have got a question for the Section 151 officer, Catherine. we're going to be looking at the budget tonight in council. Where is this proposed expenditure located in the budget papers so that we can have a look at them?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the capital table within the budget papers tonight is contained within Appendix A of the General Fund report. So it's page 39 of the council report pack. And within that table, there is a heading entitled Investment and Commercial Delivery. And the first item that is within that section is called Planned Maintenance stroke Enhancements of Corporate Buildings. And there is a figure proposed in there of £330,000 for 22-23. £30,000 of that is an annual contingency that we put in for just sort of emergency works to buildings. But the other 300,000 is what we have put into the proposed budget to cover the enhancement work at Endeavour House.
And I think some explanation about which pot of money. I think it's something perhaps those of us that are not involved with finance very often, which pot of money would that come out of? And because I know what was said in the report, it said it would come from borrowings. So where would it come from, and would there be any interest to be paid on those borrowings? Thank you.
Yes, the funding source, as you've rightly said, is from borrowing. That's one of the options that we have in terms of funding capital expenditure. For this particular project, there isn't another option, so it is borrowing. The report that came into Cabinet had the minimum revenue provision, which is one of the revenue costs of borrowing in the report. The interest element wasn't specifically mentioned, but I did look very quickly at that, and base rate at the moment is 0.5%, which is about where we do borrow. So over the 5-year period that we would be repaying the borrowing, which was the remaining term of the lease, that cost would come to about £7,500, so over that 5-year period. So in comparison to the cost of the actual building works, then the interest is very minimal.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Any further questions from the committee before we go to the next stage of the agenda? So I would like to now invite the Cabinet Member for Assets Investments, Councillor Dave Busby, to provide a summary of his case, and you have 5 minutes, Councillor Busby.
Thank you, Chair. It seems to me that there's two elements to this. The first element is the finance. Did we give sufficient information for Cabinet to make the decision? I think that given the fact that this project has been ongoing for 9 months or so, and there's been working groups and there's been feedback to the Cabinet and to all council members, we fed back the information that we had, which was the best estimate of the costs from consultants who know the building, having worked, they've been occupied in this building, so they know the building, it's not new to them. So I expect that their estimates should be very professional. And a total amount of £250,000 per council, which is not unreasonable for the amount of work that was needed. To me, the more important element of this is the need to do it. We can reduce the floor space, we know that, we've said that. But is there a need to reconfigure and refurbish the space that's left? And in my view, it's a significant need. I think you shouldn't underestimate the importance of the ambience of the working place. Just a quick story, as I said I was going to mention. 47 years ago, when I was working at Ford's, I was looking for a new job, and I had 2 interviews, one with STC in Hendon and one with Willis in Ipswich. I went to Hendon. Took me 2 hours to get through the North Circular. I was greeted. I was put through 2 hours of psychometric testing, then interviews. I wasn't introduced to the staff. There was paint hanging off the walls. The radiators were this thick. It was an awful place. I went back to Willis. You walk in the door and wow, why wouldn't you want to work there? It's an unbelievable building inside. And it was reflected in the staff. I was late. I was 2 hours late for my interview because of this blimmin' interview in STC, but they were great. No problem. They took me around to see the staff. The staff were happy. They worked better. And that's the kind of environment that gets the best out of the staff, and that's what we need to do here. It's an opportunity, and we need to do it. If you accept that, there's going to be a cost involved. And 250,000 per council is not an unreasonable cost to deliver the new working patterns that we're looking for. We've experienced it with our a lot of our clients where we act as the landlord. They're requiring us to update the offices. It's time for it to be done. The office space isn't future-proof, in my opinion.
Thank you, Councillor Busby.
Sorry, there was just the point of mentioning my story was not to try and tell you about the differences in the working space. The important point is that 47 years later, I still tell that story about the differences in the working environment. That's how important it is.
Thank you, Councillor Busby. We've noted your presentation and your experiences. I'd like to invite the lead signatory, Councillor Melanie Barrett, to provide a summary on her case, and you have got 5 minutes.
Thank you. Well, listening to some of the issues that have been raised and debated, just quickly run through a couple of points I want to make. Yes, we understand building costs are expensive. That doesn't mean that that we can't analyse and make informed decisions about that with more information on what that cost is, precisely because it is a lot of money. And there's no going back afterwards as well. It's a very final decision that alters our working environment permanently. And could stop more people coming back into the office in future should they find that home working is not so suitable. I again I've talked at Cabinet about this is not a suitable option for everyone. There are different circumstances that people have, and working from the office environment for many people is the best environment, the best place that they can work from. That's not the issue here, I don't believe, and it's distracting to look at that, really. If the expense had been known in more detail, the spec should have been clearer. I do not believe that plan was available to the Cabinet when they made the decision. If it had been, then I'm sure someone would have said, well, what's this green wall? What's a branding graphics wall? What are these? And that has not been raised at all. These things might come in at a significant cost. I have no idea. But it would have allowed a greater scrutiny, greater understanding of what was being proposed for our new working space. Sure, I accept that a more detailed technical spec would have needed to examine all those costs in general. But someone could have advised what sort of ballpark figure you're talking about for a green wall, a branding graphics. That should be available in a sort of an estimate form. Councillor Busby also suggests this is a sort of binary choice. We either value our staff and so we must spend this money, or we don't care about them, let them, let them work in a sort of squalid office. This is not a squalid office. This is a modern office. I haven't heard anyone complain about it before, about coming into this workspace. I've worked in this building myself, so I do know that it is quite a nice space to work in. It's good for collaboration, actually. That seems to be one of the mantras that we're talking about here. Good for collaborative working. This office can provide that. And what I also found strange about this plan, having seen it in more detail now, is that what you're proposing is to, I think, reduce the small office, the glass offices, the 3 that are set up for about 8 people to meet in, reduce those and enlarge the 2 others. So you actually end up with only 2 meeting rooms on that floor plate. And I find that a bit strange. When you've got an open plan office where sometimes you need to escape from the hubbub going around you and go and have a team meeting that's separate. So I don't accept that by not changing the office space that we're stuck in very sort of last century or something. This is a suitable office space, and decisions like this must be accompanied by very detailed specification on what the proposal is, what the spec is, so that you can establish what the gain is. If you don't know what the spec is, how can you examine what the gain to the workforce is? I think that's probably I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Well, we've come to the end of the presentations. I now ask that the lead signatory and the Cabinet members leave the meeting. Thank you. Yes, Councillor Busby. Yeah. Yes, as well. Yeah. I think it'd be worth just having a 5-minute break, wouldn't it? Emily, I think I'm You want me to announce it?
Yes.
Sorry about that. I didn't realise I had to.
I was just about to say, you need to say it and then it won't blink. Oh, it's so I'm sorry.
All right.
We'll get it done.
Committee, I think it would be useful, and officers present, I think it would be useful for us just to have a 5-minute break to give ourselves just a little gap between all the information that we've heard, and so we can have a little reflection on that. So, do I need to give a time? We come back at 10:45. Thank you. And again, good morning. Sorry about the break, but we're back again, and the Overview and Scrutiny Committee are going into a period of debate about the information that we've received from Cabinet members and from officers. So, who would like to open the debate? Councillor Osborne? Oh.
Chair, would you like me to comment on the policy frame?
Right. Just, yes, Emily, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Part of the protocol today is for the monitoring officer to comment on whether or not the decision was in accordance with the budget and policy framework. So, Chair, if I may, I will make that observation now. And I've also got a couple of comments on the information that's been presented to the committee this morning that I'd like to make, if that's okay. So it is my view that the Cabinet's decision was in accordance with agreed policy, and as the Section 151 officer has informed and confirmed today, within the budget. In respect of the information presented to the committee today, there are a few observations that I would like to make. Firstly, Councillor Melanie Barrett, suggested that the plan wasn't included in the Cabinet papers. However, this was included at Appendix A to the original Cabinet report. So that information, that layout plan of the floor plate, was included in the Cabinet's original report. Secondly, Chair, whilst the debate has drawn out some very interesting points around office design and the impact that it may have on the effectiveness and productivity of officers, the call-in specifically related to financial information, and therefore any recommendations made by the committee this morning must focus on that aspect. They must be related to the financial arguments. And finally, I would like to confirm that, as in any debate, the Cabinet does not necessarily have to discuss an element of the report to demonstrate that they have taken that information into account. I.e., just because the Cabinet did not ask questions on the financial information, it does not necessarily mean that they had not taken it into account or understood the information provided. As such, Chair, I believe there are two options available to the committee this morning. Firstly, to uphold the Cabinet's decision with no further action, or to refer the decision back to Cabinet with recommendations. And the committee must be very specific about the information that you think the Cabinet needs to reconsider. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Emily. Debate. Any Councillor Osborne, or do you want, or Councillor Gould, do you want to?
Yes, thank you, Emily, for that. One of the things that was concerning me was the fact that perhaps it appeared that Cabinet hadn't debated the financial implications of it. But I think, thank you, Emily, you've sorted that one out in my mind for me. That, of course, it doesn't necessarily have to be articulated to show that it's been understood. And interesting that factually one or two of the statements made to us were incorrect. And thank you for highlighting that, because we don't know. So thank you for pointing that out. And if there were any other factual inaccuracies, I guess it would have come out as well, wouldn't it? I think at the moment that's where my thinking is.
Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. If I remember rightly, officers were tasked to undertake this piece of work, and this is what they have done. Well, we are being provided with an opportunity to make year-on-year savings for the taxpayer. In my view, Endeavour House provides us with good venue, easy access to good IT and other agency. Even before COVID, it was becoming obvious that we did not require the current level of floor space. And now we even require less and flexibility working for our officers. Yes, I agree, we do need officers to work from Endeavour House most of the week, but as a council, we need to provide flexible working if we are going to be in a good position to recruit staff. And thanks to Emily for her legal situation with what happened at Cabinet, and that has put me in a good place to agree with what Councillor Busby has said. Obviously, I'm a little bit disturbed that the consultation couldn't have the amount of funding made of where it was going to be, but as I have obviously worked in facilities on large buildings in London, it is obvious that the landlord or the lease or the landlord themselves has to put back what has to be done with the areas that we do no longer require. They only have responsibilities for corridors and staircases and lighting as such. So there will be a large amount of monies coming into that from Babergh. But other than that, I think Councillor Busby is right. There's no such thing as for staff to walk into any building which doesn't actually provide that ambience that they can be together with. And I'm a little bit confused by Councillor Melanie Barrett's situation, where she tended to, I thought, contradict what she'd said previously. So whether she was of full understanding with it, I mean, I'm not completely up to date with this, but that's all I can say at present. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Well, personally, once the calling was called in, then as an overview and scrutiny, we were legally bound to actually respond to that. And I think the questions were asked were very pertinent to what we'd read in the report. I thought the report, personally, looking through, and I'm talking the report that went to Cabinet, it could have clarified. I think there were areas where it wasn't quite clear. And so, but we were faced with the calling, and that was about, was there an explanation? And in fact, on both, because I asked this question before, on both occasions, it did have to be described what the 250k was going to be spent on, because that wasn't clear really, though there was a programme in there. So, and the Cabinet sort of exploring, the detail. Certainly, nobody did ask a question on the finances, but if they are already aware of what that was, then that's fine. I'm not sure that helps the public, who perhaps are watching a public meeting, but that's a different issue altogether. So, any more comments that we want to make? Mr. Go.
I suppose a couple of comments. One is that we aren't here to scrutinise the sectioning off of the building. That's not what we're here to scrutinise. We're here to scrutinise whether the questions that were asked at Cabinet were probing enough in terms of the finances and the appropriateness of the building for the staff to be working in it isn't our question today, is it? And just because, if I can just repeat and reiterate, just because the questions weren't asked doesn't mean that they weren't understood. Maybe Cabinet didn't ask the questions because they knew the answers, so they didn't need to ask those questions. I do agree, though, that for members of the public watching, some of those questions would have been useful, just for the purposes of clarity to members of the public, really. I think that's all I want to say on it.
Yes, I mean, I actually support, I mean, I said that because, yes, in terms of the council, £250,000 within a large budget, of course, it is not as large. But to the public, £250,000 is a lot of money. And it might have been helpful to them if they'd have had some understanding of where that was going.
Can I just add that any members of the public who might have been listening to the Cabinet meeting who felt that £250 was a large spend and they wanted it broken down a little bit in terms of how many screens, how many desks, etc., I would expect that concerned member of the public to have written in, to have emailed in, to have phoned in. Is it appropriate to ask whether we have had any questions from members of the public? So any members of the public who may have been concerned haven't been sufficiently concerned to ask that question. But I still think we need to be aware of the sensitivities of our residents and the questions that they may have. But it's perhaps worth noting that no members of the public have come in with questions about, isn't 250,000 rather a lot to be spending? Well, 500,000 really, when you add Mid-Suffolk's half. But that question hasn't been asked.
And of course the other aspect of that is, Councillor Gould, is that no other member of the council has actually asked no other councillors have asked the question. Of course that is about whether councillors are interested in Cabinet and take an interest in decisions made by Cabinet. So I think that is another aspect of that no councillor will, I imagine, has not raised any concerns either. Yeah.
Well, Councillor Melanie Barrett did.
No, I was talking about the rest.
Sorry, got you. Yeah, okay, yeah.
You know,
yeah.
I mean, the Cabinet is there. Any councillor, as Councillor Busby said at the Cabinet meeting, any councillor is has got the opportunity to attend Cabinet and listen to Cabinet decisions. So, I mean, perhaps we should encourage that more amongst members of the council.
Yeah, I agree, Chair.
Right. Shall I just, Emily, shall I just reread the options open to us? Are we happy to conclude the debate? So I'm going to read the three options for us to make a choice, and it will be an electronic vote. So, two options, sorry. So the first option is refer the matter back to the Cabinet for reconsideration, together with the observations of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Cabinet will then take a final decision, and that decision cannot be called in. And the second option is that the decision is upheld and implemented immediately. Emily, do you want to give us any more words of advice?
Thank you, Chair. You've summarised the two options available to the committee, and I think it's just now calling on a committee member to propose one of those options and then take a seconder and then take a vote. Thank you.
Can I just, the second option is that the decision of Cabinet is upheld, isn't it? Yeah, okay. Well, I would like to propose that second option, that the decision that the Cabinet made originally is upheld. So it's your second option, Chair, I believe.
Seconding that, Councillor Osborne. Okay. shall we go to the, are we ready to go to the electronic vote? And I'll have to get back in, sorry.
Yes, Chair, that vote is now in progress on the app. Chair, that's 3 votes for.
Emily, with this decision, we can't make any recommendations, can we? No.
No, Chair, you can't make any specific recommendations now because effectively the item is closed. However, we will report the outcome back to Cabinet and of course the minutes of this meeting will be available for the Cabinet's information. So they will be able to pick up some of the questions and points that you've made during the debate today.
Yes, I would like to say that we had to concentrate our minds on the finances, and so we explored all sorts of different sort of aspects of the Cabinet decision. So I would hope they would take note of some of the questions that were asked. Are we to the end of the meeting? So I would like to conclude the meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance. I would like to thank all the officers who have well supported us. That's Emily and Catherine, and Arthur's been here, and the other Emily and Jan. But I'd like to thank our supporting officers, Henriette and Bethany and Alicia. These meetings can't be undertaken without your help and support. So thank you very much, and thank you for coming.